Right, so thank you very much everyone for joining me. I'd like to invite you to mute yourselves so that it is easier for us all. So welcome, it's so glad to have so many people with us today. My name is Andrew Brown. I'm the Workforce Development Specialist from the USAID Global Health Supply Chain Procurement Supply Management Project. If I mute you, please don't be offended. The background noise is coming through. I'd like to really, first of all, thank you so much for joining me in this series. In the invitation that you would have seen, you will have noticed a couple of attachments, and I wanted to bring up this particular attachment just to start. This is the particular session outline that is for this particular session. This particular workforce development series, there's going to be five modules, and this particular attachment, you'll be a different attachment for each of the 5 modules. It will have the session outcomes listed, a bit of an idea of how long it would take you to conduct this overall module. It will give you a link to a Dropbox, and this particular Dropbox, which I will now in the chat for you, will enable you to get access to all of the, just one moment, we'll just see if we can paste that. At the conclusion, I will send you the link so that you'll be able to get access to all of the things from today. Each Dropbox contains a number of materials for the particular module. And in the session outline, if you had a chance to look at it, you'll have seen that there's about two and a half hours worth of pre-reading for this particular module and for each module. So this particular course over the next 5 sessions, which is be over the next 7 weeks, for those who are interested in going the whole course, is quite intensive. It will require you to do some background reading to get the most out of this particular course, and I will be providing a certificate to all those who finish and submit satisfactorily each of the 5 assessment pieces. There'll be 1 assessment piece for each of the modules. If you just want to join in and listen and read the materials and be associated with what's happening, you're welcome, but I'll be only awarding certificates to those who submit 5 assignments, 1 for each of the modules. So just to go over the session outline so you clearly understand, there is the learning outcomes of the session. There is an estimate of time that you'll need to set aside for the session. There's materials and resources, which will either be in a Dropbox link that I'll provide to you, or they will be attached to the invitation that I sent. And for this particular module, which is the introductory module, we have the initial pre-readings that are set out there for you. And then there is a webinar, then there's post-reading, and then there is a structured activity. So you can expect that each of these particular modules will take you between 5 and 7 hours, depending on your abilities and what experience you have. The other thing you'll note about this particular webinar is I do things a little bit differently on the webinar. I like to have the conversation part of the screen up and displayed, so you can feel free to write comments as we go for everyone to see. So if you have a question, there will be a question time where you'll see this sign through the webinar, where you'll be invited to type your questions into the conversation. But if you've got a thought or something you'd like to share as you go, then please feel free to type that into the conversation section. So I want to achieve a couple of things in our time together today. One is just to provide you a broad overview of what you can expect from this certificate series. And then our module 1, which is diagnosis of workforce performance gaps, is to go into a bit of detail about our project from a health system strengthening perspective, what a systematic approach to human resources looks like, introduce you to a concept that you may not have heard about before, a theory of change for human resources, and really help you to understand how you can conduct a human resources for supply chain management assessment using a particular tool that we like in this project. There are a number of tools, but we want to introduce one specific one to you. So this particular certificate series has 5 modules. This particular module is our first one, which is Introduction and HR for Supply Chain Management Assessments, Analysis and Planning. The second one is focused on interventions around policy and planning. The third around education and learning. The fourth around management of human resources. And the fifth is about professional development of yourself and others. As I mentioned earlier, each module is about 6 hours of your time if you want to do it properly, including submitting an assignment. But you are welcome if you just wish to participate, do the readings, ask some questions, and pick up a few skills as we go. There is a link where you can re-listen to this webinar, or you can share it with others. And if you have any inquiries at all, then please feel free to email me those inquiries. You may have noticed when you looked in the conversation that we have people from around the world, from both our project as well as from visitors, from consultants. I particularly wish to do a shout out to Anita from Rwanda. She's just been on board for a couple of weeks as a workforce development advisor, and it's really thanks to her that we have this particular mini series that I'll be giving you. Mr. Mark Morris, who's the managing director, overseeing the portfolio of countries where Rwanda is situated in our project, in conjunction with Ines, the country director, thought it would be a good idea if we developed an onboarding series, which we're calling this certificate series. And so initially it was for Anita, but we've made it available to everyone globally in the project. So thank you, Anita, and I'll also be doing some other sessions with Anita as well. So just as we move along, does anyone have any particular questions they want to type into the chat with regard to the overall module series as such? If you have any questions about the module series, please type those in now in the conversation section. Otherwise, we'll move along and we'll keep our eye open for that. So I'm not going to read out these learning objectives because you can read them, even though they'll be a little bit small on your screen. The purpose here is to introduce, to really get you thinking about that capacity development is not training. The capacity development and workforce, human resources development to be sustainable needs a number of elements, and training is just one. So what we'll be doing is helping you to understand what that looks like. I want you to learn a little bit about some of the underlying principles for how a human resources system in an organization works and is sustainable, introduce you to an assessment tool, and then introduce you to a particular activity that will help you apply this learning to your country context. When I was a junior professor at the University of Canberra, teaching undergrad and postgrad students in the field of pharmacy, the hardest thing was to get anyone to do the pre-reading. So I'm not going to ask you to put up your hand if you've done the pre-reading, but my guess is many of you have not. I wanted to point out that this series of 5 modules over the next 7 weeks that we'll be running is really the combination of a number of years of study and experience by myself. And I would really encourage you to do the pre-reading to get the most out of our time together over the next few weeks. And I just wanted to review that pre-reading with you very quickly. So I've got it on the screen for you. This particular link will take you to a Dropbox that will give you, and for those of you who are wondering, this particular session outline was an attachment to the invitation you were forwarded. And this particular Dropbox will take you to the global technical approaches for our project that will explain in a quick 2 pages. If you had trouble doing the Commonics link, then you'll be able to use the Dropbox link because I organized that. So just try that second link. These technical 2 pages will give you an insight into how we as a project are approaching each of the functional areas in supply chain, whether that's warehousing, workforce development, management information systems, etc. This other document is going to be considered like our textbook for the series. And this is the Workforce Development 10-pager. The particular document that's in there, which is called the 10-pager, it will also be in the Dropbox for this module, goes into some detail about the thinking of human resources development and has links to all the tools and approaches and details surrounding workforce development approaches. And you'll find that that particular 10-pager is set out according to the 4 or 5 sessions that we're going to run. So you can see that the 10-pager aligns. For those of you who are PSM staff members, you'll be able to access this particular very large link and have a look at your work plan for your particular country. I would encourage you to do that as part of this series because it will help you think about what your country is doing in terms of its capacity development activities, and will also help you to critically reflect on those activities as you learn more as you go. There are 2 more handouts which will come to you after the call today, and they are 2 handouts from People That Deliver that are pictorial handouts that show you their framework for the theory of change for human resources that we'll discuss briefly. If you're short on time for reading, I really want you to make sure you read this one. This is the Human Resources for Supply Chain Management Assessment Guide and Tool. We're going to talk about in detail. And these are examples of human resources assessments that were conducted in Tanzania, Zanzibar, and Zimbabwe using that tool. And it gives you an idea of some of the results. So it's just a quick review of the pre-reading that you may have missed if you were unable to get to it, but I would encourage you to do that pre-reading. Now I'm just going to very quickly go over our health system strengthening section within our project so you know who we are and what we do. And I will leave you to come back to these slides in some detail. These particular questions are questions we often get asked from our field officers. We have some 33 countries now where this project is around the world, in Asia as well as in Africa. We get people talking about large staff turnover. We get people talking about in-service training. We feel like that the training isn't the root of the problems. There are other issues, and difficulty convincing counterparts that you need supply chain focused workers. And it's also hard to motivate and retain staff. We get lots of this sort of feedback. And this particular series is going to address those issues in some detail for you. Within health systems strengthening, if you've not done any studies around health system strengthening, I'd encourage you to look up this particular reference. The supply chain that we seek to strengthen is only part of a much larger system within healthcare in a particular country. Those countries often are focused on service delivery of clinical services, but the supply chain is really the lifeblood of those services. Without any product, there's no program, and you've probably heard that. And it's really healthy to remind ourselves that countries that are under-resourced are trying to deal with a whole health system, and supply chain is only part of that particular health system. And so often we need to wave the flag in order to get supply chain on the agenda. This particular picture is probably familiar to most of you. Again, just reminding us of the different elements that are involved in supply chain management. Particularly want you to notice that staffing or human resources is a central and cross-cutting feature across our product selection, quantification, procurement, storage, distribution, and ultimate use by patients. Again, as part of a quick introduction, I want to, again, if you wanted to do extra reading, this is the Potter and Brough Capacity Development Pyramid. And when we're teaching staff knowledge and skills and competencies, it's in this little block here, which is knowledge, skills, and attitudes. There's the competency development of individuals. But in a supply chain system, as in any health system, actually, it's no good just having those tools, having that knowledge. You need the tools in order to start with, and then you need the knowledge to use the tools. You need the staff and the infrastructure to use the knowledge. You need management structure, systems, and roles to use the staff, and this all needs to happen in a local context. That's why in our project we have field teams, and so we've got workforce development advisors like Anita, who will be really and a lot of you'll see people who have introduced themselves are system strengthening people from various countries. Their role is to understand the local context and put things into perspective. Within our project at headquarters, we have the health system strengthening bubble is here. So I sit in here. Alan Pringle is the outgoing director. We've got a new director who's coming in. And within health system strengthening, we have all of these arms. Don't worry that you can't read it. You can have a look on the slide later. But workforce development and the enabling environment is here. This is me. So there are other specialists in warehousing, forecasting and supply planning, management information systems, process improvement, etc. So I'm one of a whole team of specialists in supply chain management, which are the brains trusts that are helping at headquarters level. We stopped for a minute and spoke with countries and asked them to reflect about what we're trying to do as a project. And we really try to get a situation where we have a vision that countries have government-led health supply chain that's integrated, optimized and lean, and able to sustainably supply quality products to all citizens. A system with these elements managed by supply chain professionals in a culture of quality improvement. And that's a big vision. We know that a lot of countries are at all sorts of different levels when it comes to that. Some are very immature supply chain systems, and some have quite mature systems. But this is where we would like to see countries to get to. And within our health system strengthening, we have these different supporting units to help you as you work with countries to improve their supply chain. This particular series, we're going to be focusing on workforce development. Our team looks at strategy, implementation, monitoring, and thought leadership. And again, I'm just going over that quickly, just so that you can be aware of that. Also wanted to let you know that we really are looking at things like doing the right thing, the use of data, technology, innovation, and being ahead of the curve, and thinking about things that can disrupt a system in a positive way to make improvements. Again, I thought this would be helpful just to tell you this so that you can see our thinking. The other element for those of you working in the field in different country contexts is that what we're talking about today is really this bubble here, the global technical approaches or the thinking that is behind our approach as a project. Other things when you're in a particular country that you might be working with will be big health initiatives, thinking about the economic development of your environment. You also may have programmatic considerations and priorities. For example, PEPFAR, PMI, CSL, these are particular programs that USAID runs, and they have particular priorities. Now, all these things come together in order to give your country a work plan. And over the next few weeks, we'll be helping you to think about workforce development, which we remember is cross-cutting across all of the different functional areas in supply chain, and equip you with some knowledge and skills and activities that you can put into your strategies and into your yearly work plans to help make change possible in your particular country context. I noticed a couple of questions come up, and there's an opportunity to type in some more at this stage. A couple of people asked questions about the pass mark. You students, you. And basically, you will need to do all of the assignments to a level of competent. In other words, the assignment needs to be appropriate. It's not an assessment where I'm going to give you marks out of 100. It's either a competent assignment or it's not competent. And if it's not competent when you submit it, I'll tell you where you've gone wrong and you'll have a chance to fix it. So this is going to be a competency based on the assignment. But for those interested, we can talk a little bit more offline. For those who are having trouble logging on, you won't be able to hear me, but if you've seen someone, make a note. So I think there might be someone on the call from Ganesh AIDS. If you could send the link from the invitation to Dorothy, that would be very helpful. The next thing I'd like to do is to remind us about what a systematic approach to human resources looks like. If I was able to give you all badges, I would give you a badge that says capacity development is not training. I'd probably even give you t-shirts and caps, because one of the biggest problems within development projects is We think that if we just train people, give them some skills, then that's capacity development, the system will improve. Well, I'm afraid it won't improve. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a couple of models of human resources in capacity development with a number of elements. But the takeaway message I want you to underline is that unless a supply chain has effective governance and good leadership, you're not going to get sustainable change. So as you think about your priorities in different environments, you need to think about effective governance and leadership as being the key to effective change. Now, this is a model from People That Deliver, and welcome to Alexis, who I can see is online from People That Deliver. People That Deliver is a global initiative advocating to improve professionalization of supply chain and to improve a systematic approach to human resources. Our project does some work with them, as well as a number of people on this call. Now, what's interesting is what are we really trying to achieve from a human resources? Now, I would be able to retire if what was on the screen was happening in every country. Can you imagine in your country if you had qualified staff hired or contracted for supply chain management positions? There were career incentives that were provided, there was high staff satisfaction and good staff retention. Supply chain management jobs were desirable, people actually sought the qualifications, and there were national institutions providing relevant qualifications. If this was the situation, we would be all out of a job and we would be very happy because we had achieved this, and probably would be working with those entities to help them in country rather than in a supporting role to help grow their country. The difficulty with human resources strengthening and capacity development in this regard is it needs a long-term focus. Typically, it can take 10 years to change a human resources system. This has particularly been our experience in case study countries like Mozambique, where different projects have been working for 10 years, and just now we're starting to get some change. It often requires policy, practice, and perception change at the highest level. It needs a fair bit of money, and it also needs to understand that things happen over time. In many projects, we get into the one yearly cycle of activities and we lose sight of the bigger picture we're trying to achieve. So as part of having a 3-year to 5-year strategy, it gives us a bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve. And when it comes to human resources strengthening, we need to have that bigger picture. There's really two things we're aiming for. So if you are trying to improve the capacity of human resources in countries, there are two things you want to achieve. One is a situation where you've got strong professionals who assume end-to-end responsibility for the performance of their supply chain, but can also make change happen. You also are looking to ensure that there are institutionalized policies and procedures to finance, develop, support, and retain a sufficient health supply chain workforce. So as you're thinking about the activities in your country and the work that you are doing, are the things you're doing working towards these outcomes with that ultimate goal of having a sustainable system? I want to tell you this in another way. I'm a very picture-oriented person, and a number of you have seen these pictures before, but I'm going to quickly remind us of them again. I like to think of the human resources bus approach when I'm thinking about human resources. I'm not sure if anyone's had the privilege of being to London. I have on a couple of times and ridden on a bus like this. When it comes to the bus model, there's a couple of things that I want you to think about. These are the conductors. These are the leaders of the bus. And we imagine the bus is our supply chain organization. One of the most important parts is getting the right people on the bus. Passengers can't get on unless they've paid their fare and they can get on the bus. People should not be able to join a supply chain organization unless they're selected appropriately against a job description with the right competencies for the jobs and selected through an open, competitive process. And once they're on the bus or in the organization, they should need to be onboarded properly and orientated to their activities so they can be as productive as possible. Big thing here, getting the right people on the bus. The other thing is, once you've got people on the bus, are they in the correct seats on the bus? In other words, we would use things like supportive supervision, performance management, and succession planning to be moving people around the bus to ensure the staff are as productive as they can be in their particular environment, and also on the career trajectory that they want to follow themselves. So getting people on the bus, putting the people in their correct seats. Keeping the right people on the bus. Some people are scared of going in buses and they'll jump off as quickly as they can as soon as their ride's finished. In a supply chain organization, you want to hang on to your people as long as possible to improve your productivity and to get some experience in your organization over time. The two things we want to think about in relation to that is staff retention and your work environment. Is your work environment conducive for staff? And do you have policies in place that seek to retain staff? And over the next couple of modules, we're going to talk about these things in more detail, but just a quick overview today. The hardest one, though, is getting the wrong people off the bus. The conductor has a role if any passengers have bad behaviour or endangering other people to remove people from the bus. All organisations have a HR system that allows us to remove people who are bad performers. This is the most difficult thing to do, and often in many countries, culturally, it's seen as being not appropriate. But I would argue that bad people who are underperforming and causing problems in an organisation cause more trouble being there than the trouble it takes to get them out. Just something to think about. So that's the bus. Not to confuse you, but different people think in different ways. Another way is that bus analogy can also form under 5 different building blocks. We can talk about having engaged stakeholders. So these are leaders, both political and technical, who really understand supply chain and can really make things happen. So we spoke about leaders. Policies and plans. Have we got all the policies and plans in place, whether it's onboarding, whether it's recruitment, whether it's supervision policies, whether it's staff number policies, retention, succession planning, all those things. Do we have those in place? Workforce development. Have we got a plan that develops individuals as well as the supporting structures, the universities or the other teaching and learning institutions? Do we have a plan that thinks about pre-service education, in-service education, mentoring, and also deals with the issue of seconded staff in an appropriate manner? Do we have performance management systems? And have we thought about retention? Supply chain management skills in health are probably 90% similar to the supply chain competencies used for other goods like fast-moving goods, supermarkets or other businesses. Probably only about 10% of competencies are different between health products and other products. Good people are hard to find in supply chain and good people move. So what are we doing to keep the good people? And then professionalization. When I talk about professionalization, I'm talking about making sure that we've got full-time people for supply chain positions, that those full-time people are chosen for the competencies needed for that particular job, that they are supported in that role, recognized in that role, and given an opportunity for career progression in that role. That's what I mean about professionalization. Then in these modules, next week, we're going to talk about policy and planning interventions. Then after that, we're going to talk about education and learning interventions and management interventions. So it's a couple of different ways to think about the same sorts of aspects of human resources. But the big takeaway message is, where's the word training on this page? Can you see it? No. I've tried very careful not to use the word training because systematic capacity development and the creation of human resources systems is not training and takes many other elements, and it takes these other elements. So I resist using that word training. What I would like to do is to introduce you to a couple of tools that you have access to. Once you get this slide deck, you'll be able to access this. If you've just come online, I'd encourage you just to mute your microphone. See if I can find you. Yes, I found you. I'm going to mute you. Don't be sad if I've muted you. Your background noise is just a bit noisy. There are a bunch of resources that we have in this project that you have access to. And these resources I would like you to consider as little mini textbooks or resources for this course. One of these is a two-pager, which I already referred to, and it looks like this. It gives a quick two-page overview of why workforce development is important and how we go about it. That particular document is very helpful if you are talking to counterparts in government or other organisations to help them understand in a brief, direct way the importance of workforce development and that it's more than training. I mentioned about the 10-pager. The 10-pager is a particular document that goes into some detail about the things we're talking about, and we'll be using this as a bit of a textbook over the next 4 weeks. There is also in this Dropbox a quick introductory webinar which talks about similar things as what we're talking about today, but not in the context of the certificate series. And then also, this is the first module in a 5-module certificate series, which you're very welcome. So these are all of our workforce development tools that we have access to. You can use the webinar, the introductory webinar, which is a nice, neat and tidy 1-hour overview for people who have no knowledge or little knowledge in workforce development. You can use that as a tool for a training with your team or with other colleagues in other organisations, for example. Again, this is going to be a little stop point to see if you have any particular questions. The topic we've just spoken about is that capacity development is not training. It involves a systematic approach to human resources. We spoke about the bus, we spoke about 5 building blocks from people that deliver, and then I spoke about our resource documents. If you've got any particular questions or you'd like a point of clarification, please note that in the conversation while I just have a drink of water. Any comments so far? If you're finding it interesting, you can make me feel happy by typing that in. If you're finding I'm speaking too fast, then please note that. If there's a particular question that comes to mind or something you'd like more clarity on, then I would encourage you to type that in to the conversation as well. Sometimes facilitating webinars can feel a bit lonely. So please feel free to talk to me by typing in that conversation area. This next part of the webinar is just to very quickly introduce to you a theory of change that People That Deliver has been leading a project developing a theory of change with a project called HRH 2030 as well as our particular project. Now, what a theory of change is written on the screen. I'm not going to read that to you, but I'll make it a little bit bigger. But basically, a theory of change is a method for helping us to really understand a particular situation, why things happen, and then how we can improve an overall system by understanding that system in detail. Now, USAID was asking the question, and with People That Deliver is, have we been successful in our investments in human resources for supply chain management? There's been investments from projects with regard to human resources management over the last number of years, several $100,000 worth of investments, and that was the particular question. Now, this is a little bit light to read. I was going to pick up a couple of high points as I make you giddy. So a theory of change is an ongoing process of reflection to explore change and how it happens. It thinks about a program and a wider analysis of how change comes about, draws on external learning about development, articulates organizations' understanding of change. So I wanted to tell you, just get a handle on this idea that the theory of change is a detailed way of thinking about a complex problem. Now, in this particular context of thinking about supply chain management, USAID were asking the questions is, how did USAID supply chain projects define problems and discuss performance? What solutions did USAID supply chain projects suggest? And what did USAID supply chain projects define as success? So this was what was driving the thinking. Now, if you're like me, you like pictures. And through a series of consultations with many countries, as well as with many people, you're going to get a bigger picture of this, but I want to point out a couple of things. With the research that was conducted, they were able to create this picture to help us understand some details about human resources from a theory of change perspective. What are the things that influence or affect how change happens? So right at the top, if a supply chain is working well, we're getting health outcomes are improved, but we know that there are lots of different factors that that influence health outcomes in a country. But one of those is making sure that commodities are available at service delivery points to meet the needs in the most cost-effective way possible. This is something, an outcome that a supply chain can influence. But you need money, you need a whole range of other things apart from just having right people. So when we think about right people, if we do all the human resources aspects properly, we can have work performance as being optimized. Now, for people to be working in an organization and to have optimized performance, the study revealed 4 things. You need staffing, skills, working conditions, and motivation. These are the 4 streams or the 4 arms of the theory of change. Now, the orange is actually what we're trying to achieve there. So for staffing to work well, you need all necessary supply chain positions and all competencies filled. For skills, workers need to be able to apply their skills as appropriate at every level of the supply chain. If you've just come on deck, I just need you to mute your self, please. Thank you. Working conditions. Working conditions support performance. Motivation, that supply chain workers are motivated to do their jobs. So these 4 things need to be in place. And this is another way of describing some of the things that we've been talking about already, where capacity development is more than just training. Let's just look at a couple of those bubbles a little bit closer. And in answer to Anissa's question about getting the right people in the organization, absolutely, that's something we're going to be talking about, and that's going to be picked up in module number 4. These 4 things need to be in place. Now, we've placed them at the same level because they've given even weighting. If any of those 4 pathways, as we described them, were not present, then you would not have an optimized workforce. You need all 4 to be present. And again, we haven't got time today to go into these in detail, but you'll be given the handouts to have a bit of a look. But let's look at staffing, for example. So you need the ability to recruit quality candidates. You have to have an adequate pool of workers, and you've got to have sufficient budget to employ them, for example. When you think about skills, you need adequate technical and managerial competence. Staff have leadership skills, and they need to understand their roles and responsibilities in a workplace. Motivation is another interesting one, where good performance is supported, workers have a sense of ownership of their role, and supply chain workers understand and care about their roles in a healthcare system. So this is all about motivation. So in summary, our theory of change has 4 pathways that need to be present in an organization for work performance being at its optimized particular level. Now, the next couple of slides give you some of the more detail around the theory of change. And I'm not going to take the time just now to go into these in detail, but I'm just going to note a couple of things. The long-term outcome, this was that green box at the top, which is, the long-term outcome that we're trying to do is that workforce performance is optimized. Okay, we have outcomes, we have pathways, and we have preconditions. The preconditions were the little blue circles that are at the bottom of the page. So I just want you to know that there is more detail here for you to have a look at a little bit later to just understand a little bit more. But all that I want you to do is the main takeaway message, and then look at in detail later, is that to optimize work performance in organization, there are 4 particular pathways. in order to make that happen, and all are important. So I've mentioned briefly about staffing. I've mentioned about skills, and this is just what I've described to you from the diagram. And there's more details here about working conditions and motivation. And I'll leave you to have a look at that in a bit more detail. Now, the last 15 minutes, I want to turn our attention to doing supply chain management assessments for human resources. Now, one of the pre-reading activities was to have a look at a toolkit that's called the HR Assessment Guide and Tool. Now, the purpose of that particular assessment, which is quite easy to do, is to document the current state of human resources capacity and identify opportunities to build human resources structures as well as the people themselves. The way it works is by building ownership of the people who should have responsibility for human resources. There is a particular tool that looks at having some surveys of people who understand the human resources system, people in academia who be training people in this area, people within the supply chain organization who look after human resources, different development partners who might be supporting. So there's a whole range of people with ownership, and they work together to adapt a tool and surveys to really understand the environment. So by using this particular process, you do get a detailed human resources assessment around the different pathways or building blocks that we're talking about. So it's not just looking at training, it's looking at the leadership, the policies and plans, the workforce development aspect, the professionalization, and it's also looking at the retention and performance management systems in detail. The information that you get from doing this gives you a supply chain strategy. Now, a strategy is the overarching document or the high-level thinking about how we can make something change over time. But then it also gives you an implementation roadmap. It suggests activities to take your weaknesses and build them into strengths over time. So the outputs of this assessment helps you to direct limited funding. Funding is not available for everything, and to some of the key activities. To connect human resources with the supply chain. Often human resources is the last thing that is looked at in a supply chain, but it should be one of the first. And the outputs also is to help build the capacity of supply chain personnel who not only help participate in the assessment, but the outputs of the activities that are suggested from the assessment also help to do that. Now, I mentioned and showed you the different building blocks. Now, in this particular assessment tool, these are the 5 building blocks that are looked at. In other words, the human resources systems are broken down into these 5 pieces of pie. And different things are looked for to see if they're present. So, for example, if you have powerful constituencies or strong leadership, you should have in place a supply chain management human resources champion. You should have a commodity security group that's at the state, regional, or national level that leads discussion about strengthening the system. These are called dimensions, and you get there's a whole list of these dimensions in the tool, and you get marks if they're present, and you don't get marks if they're absent. For policies and plans, have you got standard operating procedures? Have you got human resources policies? Have you got a human resources information system? This is a computerized system that manages all the people, their history, as well as their competencies. Again, you can see in a country if this is present or not and allocate marks. Similarly, there are these different dimensions under workforce development, workforce performance management, and professionalization. So basically, this particular process, there is a preparation by having an initial group of people to get a scope for what we're trying to achieve and have an assessment team, and that reviews resources and materials, pull things together, confirms the methodology and refines the tool for local application, and then pulls together all the results. So it has a preparation, implementation, and analysis and report phase. Preparation is desk audit. Implementation is a couple of weeks of interviews and data gathering and focus groups. And the analysis and report is simply pulling together the data and to be able to make a report that others can follow and understand, to get an understanding of the strengths and weaknesses in the human resources system and how to fix those. Now, what's really interesting is you get an overall supply chain profile. So this really helps to understand the system, the roles and responsibilities of people, where all the people are or where they are not, and how the supply chain looks from a human resources perspective. The focus groups help to really understand the issues, the problems, and the systems, where the gaps are. And one-on-one interviews conducted with key informants in order to get this additional detail and to clarify particular issues that are raised. So we describe it more as a qualitative process because it's mainly interviews. But again, remember the bus, I like pictures. Now, one of the really exciting things for me with this particular tool for assessment, it basically gives you a dashboard that's a colored petal diagram. I call it a spider diagram. So each one of these 5 colors represents the 5 different building blocks that we've described. And each building block is made up of different dimensions. I mentioned a couple earlier. So for a country to get full marks or 100% in each of these petals, they have to have all the components. No country is ever perfect. This next slide shows you 2 countries, but we won't name them, and everything's a bit smaller, so let me explain. So this is the petal diagram or the spider diagram for 2 countries. The colored area is where that particular country has strength in one of the particular building blocks. So let's look at this country. So this particular country, yellow, they've got powerful leaders. So they've got good leadership. Probably about half of all the color is filled in. The other one is blue. So they've got some good, strong policies and plans in place. But their workforce development is weak. Their performance management is weak. And overall professionalization is extremely weak. So this is a very underdeveloped system when it comes to human resources, with a lot of work to do to improve the color in that area. But I think you can see that by having a diagram like this from such a tool, you can start the conversation with people. And you can use this in order to help create plans, action plans, in order to obviously improve the color. How do we get more color? What are we going to do to improve the color in this particular petal? This particular diagram here gives you some quite good color in the powerful constituencies, in policies and plans, and also in workforce development. Now, someone's reading ahead in the slides. How many countries have you already assessed? Dorothy, thanks for those questions, keep me on my toes. So these are all the countries that have had this particular assessment, and there's been more. It's about 20 on the screen. And currently, this particular tool is being used by Global Fund with people that deliver to do HR assessments, I think, in another 15 countries over the next 1 to 2 years. And maybe Alexis, if she's there, can just type in a couple of points just about that while we're talking. There's a relationship between people that deliver in Global Fund where they're applying this tool in a bunch of countries. Within our project, we're trying to learn which those countries are so we can share with you when one of these assessments is going to take place so you can participate in that. So some of the key results is being able to help identify the number of staff required. It's been able to establish logistics management unit because there wasn't one, it was uncovered by the study. Be able to strengthen and develop a recruitment toolkit, something that Anita asked us before. This particular tool identifies if there is an absence of proper recruiting systems, and there's a toolkit that people can use to help improve their system. And results have opened the door to a larger supply chain strategy conversation. Now, I've recently used this spider diagram in Ethiopia as well as in Pakistan and Nepal, and have found it very helpful to start conversations in those environments. We currently have a detailed plan for a human resources strategy that's going to the government to be considered to try and get action to happen, to try and get them to work towards this. But the particular to get to this level does take a few years, and it's not something that will happen quickly. So we need to remind ourselves of that. So what I've tried to do, again, is just to give you that overview of the HR for Supply Chain Management assessment tool. I wanted to let you know that in the 10-pager, there is a section which has other assessment tools. There's a gentleman online today, Sebastian. He has worked with UNICEF for developing a tool for assessing human resources in immunization systems that can be used in different environments. The link to that tool is in the 10-pager. There are also WHO tools that have been used for human resources, and some of those are also listed within the 10-pager. Within our project, we find this tool is nice and simple to use. It helps us unpack the detail that we're looking for to explain to governments to develop supply chain strategies with them. So what I'd like to do is just to explain what the little assessment is for this particular module for those of you who are wanting to submit assessments. So the particular project that I'd like you to do is I want you to prepare a scope of work for conducting a human resources for supply chain management assessment in your country, or if you're not working in a particular country, you can choose a country with some information that you can get hold of. So the resources I want you to use is that in this particular module, as well as in the 10-pager, are links to a range of documents that explain this assessment tool in detail, and also some documents that show examples of how the tool was applied in different countries. So I want you to use that experience to develop a scope of work that if you were going to have this assessment be conducted in your country, what would the scope of work look like so that you could convince someone, in this case USAID, to put some money towards this activity? Don't worry about the cost of it for this particular assignment, but I want you to think about and to prepare that scope of work. To help you, I've also put in the Dropbox an example scope of work which is not for this activity, but it gives you the different headings that you can rearrange and have a look at. What I would also say is if you have any particular questions as you start to think about that assignment, is just to give me an email to do that. If you've got any questions about that assignment now, then you can just type that in. But it's simply I want you to prepare a scope of work, and it's only usually a scope of work is no more than 4 pages. There's an example in the Dropbox of one for a training activity, but I want you to make one for conducting a HR for supply chain management assessment. In this situation, it's actually I want you to do the scope of work to be able to conduct a human resources assessment. So I don't want you to be thinking about the results of that assessment, but what needs to be thought about for a scope of work to conduct the assessment. So if you were asked to apply that tool in your country, someone said, Andrew, I want you to apply the human resources assessment tool in country X. Please draft me a scope of work so I understand what it's going to take in order to get a consultant to come and do that in my country. That's what I'm referring to. If you have any further questions on that, you can let me know. So this has been an exciting time together. And webinars with lots of people on deck can be a little bit of a one-way conversation, but I'm really thankful we've had up to 26 people on the call, so it's been very exciting. What we've tried to do in this hour is to give you an overview of the certificate series. So there are 5 modules. This is the first one. And in the invitation that you responded to for here are the dates of all of the other modules. They will all be recorded. So that if you miss one, you can go back and listen to the recording. You are welcome to come to any or all of the particular modules. If you would like to get a certificate, then you need to finish each of the assignments that I set for each of these modules. And those assignments are just listed briefly in the session outline and also on the slide deck. If you have any particular questions, you just send me an email and then we can arrange a side Skype to do that in more detail. In today's module, we've done a lot more, of course, than what we're going to do in the assignment. I would encourage you to do the pre-reading. I would encourage you to look in a bit more detail about what our headquarters can do for you. Hopefully you've walked away with a clear understanding that capacity development in human resources is not training, and hopefully your ideas have been widened as to the different elements that it is. Introduced you very briefly to this theory of change concept, and in the Dropbox is some more handouts for you to have a look at that concept. I've particularly wanted you to focus on human resources for supply chain management assessment, and that's why I've asked you to do assignment in that regard. And with that, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to be part of this webinar together. And so you probably can see this yourself, but there are lots of people on the call. And I'm going to stick around for the next few minutes. If you have to leave, I understand, but if you have particular questions you wish to ask, or if you want to put any comments in the conversation, we will be sending out an evaluation form later. But if you have any particular comments or questions now, I'll be here for the next 10 minutes. For those of you who have to leave, thank you very much. I will be sending you a link to the Dropbox that contains a recording of today, as well as all the resources. So thank you very much. Those of you giving me messages, thank you so much for those, really appreciate that. The deadline for the assignment, I haven't really set one because I know people have a very varied set of activities. Basically, over the next few weeks would be wise, but when I get to the last module, I'll probably give everybody 4 weeks. So you've probably got till the end of June in order to get all your assignments done. Thank you again for those with the comments, much appreciated. I'm glad you found it helpful. And if you have any particular questions as you think about this further, please send me an email.